Be a man. When's the last time you heard that phrase? What about boys don't cry or grow a pair? We've all heard these expressions directed towards men and boys of all ages and maybe even said them ourselves. I'm a man, but I don't really know what that means besides what's between my legs. I have a basic understanding from my social circles that men are meant to be with women and that they're supposed to be masculine. But I also have my questions. For example, do my lacking of certain macho features or my more effeminate qualities make me any less of a man? I debate with myself and my peers on the importance of relationships and whether or not having more than one woman or a more formidable, bulkier body would make us more manly or real men, whatever that means. I don't know. I just know I want to be important and loved. This desire is something that all people share in some light, and this confusion that I feel is something that all men and boys have in common, yet no one can know that because we men don't need directions or a map, so we keep it to ourselves. And if we're going to be honest, it's not working very well. We are so lost in our pursuit to be real men, we forget to focus on what good masculinity is. Instead of being honorable, we end up with harmful norms of masculine behavior, such as hyper-masculinity and objectifying of women. We parade around with our false bravado and act like everything's fine when so many men and boys are struggling with fear and anxiety. I'm not fine, and I'm far from okay. I'm lost, and I'm getting conflicting information from all directions. So it's time to stop this act. Drop the false bravado and begin to look at the map. And start to teach and encourage healthy masculinity for today's boys and tomorrow's men. And abandon these superficial status symbols of today's society. Men need to be taught what healthy and appropriate masculinity is to form complete men. In healthy masculinity, there is a balance. In the words of Steve Girilli, a man is strong but sensitive, stable but also aware of his fears. Men aren't taught what healthy masculinity is, and so they have unhealthy relationships with others and their own emotions. This imbalance leads to men who don't understand the world or themselves. They are lost and confused, which leads to depression, suicide, violence, and isolation. Men are expected to be masculine without a decent roadmap or understanding of what it means to be a man. The dictionary defines the word masculine as having the qualities traditionally ascribed to men, such as strength and boldness. But it's not very common to find a young man flipping through a dictionary looking for his own personal character traits. Instead, young men look to all sorts of media to find their character qualities. An example of this could be the strong and rugged and stoic cowboy who walks the land alone, fighting with his strong sense of justice while picking up many stealing girls along the way. Or you can imagine the esteemed athlete who made his way to the top with his kick, butt, and take names mentality. Or you can even imagine the famous rapper with his godlike confidence, independence, and powerful character. Boys subconsciously look to these men for a foundation and inspiration for their own character. The issue with this lies in the fact that many of these role models are just as confused about their own masculinity. And from this hot mess of confused characters, hypermasculinity arises. Now, before I go any deeper into my thesis, I should probably give a definition of what hypermasculinity is. In the words of author Ronald Craig, hypermasculinity is a sociological term, denoting the exaggerations of forms of masculinity, virility, and physicality. In this mindset, violence is considered virtuous, emotions weak, women childish trophies, and danger as thrilling. This, of course, is an extreme, but there is a spectrum, and it is very prevalent in our society today. An example of this could be almost any Clint Eastwood character, usually highlighting his stoic and macho persona. Or you can imagine the modern rapper, rapping about his money, power, and women. These are two examples of hypermasculinity. A healthy sense of self can lead a man to mature strength. Ironically, hypermasculinity leads to exceptionally fragile, unstable men. Masculinity has been related to virility since the time of ancient Rome, with men like Julius Caesar. To make his way up the ranks, he would sleep with whomever it was necessary. To degrade an opponent, he would sleep with the man's wife. Characters like Goliath The Philistine, who was worshipped for his incredible size, intimidated entire armies with his presence alone. Strength brought fear into your enemy's eyes, and women came after, and they were both worshipped and related to victory. There have always been men striving to be the greatest throughout history. In the film Scarface, Al Pacino's character puts it pretty well. In this country, you gotta make the money first. Once you get the money, you get the power. Once you get the power, you get the women. This hyper-masculine behavior is alive and thriving in our ultra-macho world where the biggest man takes home the money, the power, and the women. This stoic view of masculinity integrated itself into modern America briefly after the World Wars, as many men came back home to go and settle down and begin a new life. But these were not the men that had left to fight the war. These men had witnessed things that changed and stressed their minds. They'd left the battle, but the war raged on in many of their heads. Those who were shell-shocked or suffered post-traumatic stress had difficulty emerging back into civilized America. Many decided to not speak of their traumatic experiences and chose or couldn't speak of their pain. This common and spoken rule, not to mention disregard for veterans' mental health, soon became something of a norm with most men. And as the 1950s led on to the 60s, the strong stoic type soon became revered as the real man stereotype. This is where we are currently. And we are now aware of just how lost we are. So let's look at the map and find where we are, where we've been, and where we need to be. Right now we're in the region where the superficial real man is praised. As we look at the scenery, we'll find this landscape disgusting and hollow. As we admit our confusion, we will come to realize how really lost we are. On this trek, we will see the pressures placed on men and its effects on everyone around them. By looking at the map, the destination will become clear, and the proper roadmaps and signs will show itself. Admitting our confusion is the first step to finding the way. When people imagine a real man, they may picture someone like James Bond, a man who is strong, intimidating, confident, and suave. The true alpha male. Movies endlessly glorify superheroes with their physiques of Greek gods, who are pursued by all women and solve problems with their mighty fist. In music, many songs are about sex and men and their many lovers. Media gives us a first-hand look at the lives of models and their journeys of success. Success being defined by their looks, money, sexual prowess, and doing whatever one has to for fame. These sources all reinforce the alpha male archetype, a stereotype that is actually harmful to men and to society at large. Men are forced to place themselves in a box that they must conform to, or they face the petrifying possibility of being labeled, mocked, and outcasted. One of the most revolting parts of this twisted, hypermasculine behavior is the way that women are thrown around in all of these situations. The suffering that men cause and continue to inflict on women does not get enough attention. Women are harassed, sexually assaulted, and abused constantly in the United States and around the world. And the worst part about all of this is that a great number of these victims don't even come forward. And those who do are often ignored, shamed, threatened, and silenced. Statistics show that 1 in 5 women will be raped at some point in their lives. Another statistic showed that 63% of all sexual assaults are not even reported. And that's in America alone. In many situations, the victim is blamed for the incident, for not being vocal enough, for being dressed inappropriately, or for their behavior. Women are being held responsible for their actions and for the actions of men as well. But instead it should be the men who are told that they are wrong for their inappropriate behavior. The language describing amorous intent has even changed from, "I'd like to date her," to, "I'd hit that," to more crudely, "I'd smash." My generation is soaking up all this hypermasculine, chauvinistic messages we're surrounded by and is starting to accept them as normal. Men need to be taught that this behavior is cowardly, pitiful, and wrong. We men need to be held accountable for our actions. This is where we are currently. Stuck in a loop, as men are praised for being these trophy hunters who treat women like their prey. Society is encouraging us to be these mindless cavemen. There's a terrible common belief among most men that it is weak or gay for a man to talk about his emotions or fears. Men need to be taught that the true mark of bravery is the ability to be vulnerable. There is no shame in facing one's fears, being afraid, or being emotionally transparent. As young boys, we look for relationships with our brothers whom we can love. And as we grow up, such talk of brotherly love is immediately labeled as gay. The word gay has gained a very negative connotation in our world and is used by people to describe things they do not like or agree with. But that shouldn't be the case. We should use our words well and not be bullied into these numb mountains of muscle. Many teenage boys who express feelings or show love to their brothers are often outcasted from their friend groups. A deep fear of rejection brings many boys to simply stop emoting. So quickly, boys abandon these healthy relationships, and it results in many lonely, friendless men who don't know how to communicate their wants or their needs. They're too afraid that expressing their emotions may somehow affect their masculinity in some shape or form. Vulnerability does not negate masculinity. Expressing your emotions does not change your sexuality. Scapegoats are constantly used to avoid the real and painful emotions. And from this denial, the pit of despair goes deeper and deeper. This is where we are currently, stuck in a loop, as men aren't raised by their fathers, but by their media. These degrading stereotypes will lead to men who don't know how to communicate, and they are lost and feel the need to fight their battles on their own. When in reality, so many of us cannot take our demons on by ourselves. This pressure and isolation will lead to more violence and aggression. The cowardly treatment of women is nothing new, and the issue of objectification becomes worse each and every day, like maggots in an infected wound. We must speak of our weakness so that we can grow in strength together. A man who speaks to his peers about his pain or struggles can have someone to talk to, a new branch of support, instead of having to deal with his issues alone. Many men look for outlets to release these unspoken emotions, and the outlets often include sports, money, sexual promiscuity, and riots. Riots and bar fights about which team is better or why one leader is worse may not be about passionate ideals, but instead a projection or redirection of one's inner pain. Bullies hurt others to fight the true feelings of pain that they feel from other outside sources. There is a section from the book, The Cry of the Soul, by Dan Gallagher and Tripper Longman III, that speaks of society using the mask of emotions. In their books, they speak of the masculine and feminine trading one emotion for the other. Many men find it easier to feel anger rather than hurt or confusion, and many women find it easier to feel hurt or confusion rather than anger. These authors bring to light the fact that our society hides behind certain emotions to avoid other emotions. And this is where we are currently, just avoiding one emotion for the other. Boys are afraid to express their emotions because they're scared of being rejected from other friend groups. And as we continue to encourage these things, we're only going to have more men who are completely lost. We are in denial of the obvious circumstances of our masculinity, as many people believe that we should encourage boys to be tougher and that they need to be more independent and emotionally self-reliant. People are under the influence that we need more manly men with the existence of homosexuality and all those who don't fit the real man mold. Just because a man expresses his vulnerability or talks about his emotions doesn't make him any less of a man. What people define as masculine is not related to emotions, but instead behavior. A great amount of our society can be split into two extremes. An article by Terence O'More speaks of these two extremes today. On the extreme side of the spectrum are barbarians. In this section, there are men who are young, testosterone-fueled athletes who have their minds wrapped around only sports and women. On the other end of the spectrum are wimps who lack the confidence and backbone of the barbarians. They're confined to a cage of their self-pity, and they lack the confidence that the barbarians have themselves. They did not defend the honor of others or their own peers who were being harassed by the barbarians because they were afraid and lacked character. In the words of C.S. Lewis, they are men without chest. These men without chests need more masculine qualities, yet without the proper guidance, they will simply become more barbarians. We need to encourage healthy masculinity. The solution between these two lies in the middle ground, the gentleman. 100 years ago, men lived in a time where manners were something of a necessity. Whether it be standing when a woman entered the room, watching their language, or having standards of honor in society, these men were taught from a young age how to act appropriately among others. The men of this time had their own flaws and issues that they needed to overcome, but they were far more refined than the men we are surrounded by today. We need to encourage masculinity's good and healthy qualities of protecting others and being honorable. Or in the words of Steve Girilli, until boys understand that tenderness, love, and nurturing, and other things that are seen as feminine are just as important to the identity of a man, then he'll always live a life that's relationally insufficient. Masculinity alone is good. Hypermasculinity is what is wrong. Healthy masculinity is vital to all people. Examples of healthy masculinity can be seen in the Bible, with men like Joseph and Jesus. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and suffered greatly because of it. Through God, Joseph made his way up in the ranks through Egypt, and eventually when he encounters his brothers again, he could have made them pay for all the actions they had done against him. But instead he chooses to act out in kindness. In all the suffering his brothers caused, he chooses to be kind, and it makes him an even greater man. Jesus was slow to anger and nurtured all those around him. Jesus is God, and through him we can see his betrayal of masculinity. We see a man who was open about his emotions, was aware of his fears, and was open about all of it. Jesus acted in anger once in the temple, and even then it was righteous anger. These two role models give perfect examples of healthy masculinity, nurturing and sensitivity, and overall honor. And they should be examples to all men. This is where we are currently. We've looked at the map and we can see where we are. We've admitted our confusion and we can see how these unhealthy stereotypes can affect society. Men, it's time to stop the act. We're in a place where toxic masculinity is worshipped in our society and is made to seem glamorous and beautiful. In reality, it's corrosive and terrible for our people. So many young men and boys believe that they're entitled to the love of women. And this is unacceptable, not just because she's someone's sister, daughter, or wife. It's because she's someone. We're in a place where people believe this is right, and it needs to stop. Toxic masculinity is evident everywhere. We need to realize that as people, our greatest ability is the blessing of speech. Men, when you are struggling or in need of help, talk to one another, speak out. When we pretend to be all right and bottle up our emotions, we only hurt ourselves more by not treating the wound. For the betterment of our future, we need to teach boys and girls of all ages that a good man and woman strive to improve their character. Toxic masculinity is everywhere and it has infested our lives and the children. The children are so immersed in this storm that everything seems normal. But once the storm dies down, we'll soon come to realize all the destruction it has brought. So men, we may not realize it, but we are lost. Some more than others. And until we choose to change, nothing is going to happen. So don't be real men. Be good men. Thank you.